Realistically, for someone to truly be able to grow, it's by cultivating an environment where someone can bring their best self to work.
Mm,
Now, for me, that means I have to know what their best self can be.
mhm.
I have to understand what they could truly become. And if I don't know that, then I'm not going to be able to set up a good kind of environment for them to grow. It's going to be they are only growing to the capacity of that current business needs, not for future capabilities.
All right. Hi, Brandon. We're so excited to have you today in the studio to chat about leadership development and performance. So let's just get us started. I know you're a COO. You have a big role at VIB, serving some very important clients. So let's just get warmed up with, just tell us a little bit about your role, and especially how it pertains to leadership, leadership and development at your company at VIB.
Yeah. Absolutely. So my role at VIB, so I oversee a few functions, some of which are engineering, post sales, operations. And as I came into the organization, taking over this role, there was a lot of individuals that had never really been trained. It was that
Hmm.
nice experience of they got thrown into a role, didn't know what they were doing. They're now managing a team, didn't have clear expectations. So it's a lot of building the next generation of leaders to
Hmm.
be able to drive this business going forward using talent we have and kind of developing it in a new way. So there's a lot kind of that goes into it. And we also kind of work externally with individuals trying to learn and grow and kind of advance their knowledge. So that's kind of how we do some partnerships with our demand generation for our customers. There's a lot that we go on internally and externally to develop and kind of train and upskill individuals.
All right. Well, that's a great setup to dive into some of those challenges and opportunities and solutions that you've seen work. So let me just get started by asking you, you mentioned working with all kinds of teams, right? So from engineering to legal to post sales, how do you find building leadership consistently across those very diverse functions and the differences that come with the people that work in them inherently?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. There's going to be some differences. However, the key thing for me across any function, it doesn't matter what they're doing, is
Hmm.
making sure they know my clear expectations of what I expect of them every day. And it's
Hmm.
not, okay, I expect you to come in and do this task, let's do that task. What I mean is, realistically, for someone to truly be able to grow, it's by cultivating an environment where someone can bring their best self to work.
Hmm.
Now, for me, that means I have to know what their best self can be.
Hmm.
I have to understand what they could truly become. And if I don't know that, then I'm not going to be able to set up a good kind of environment for them to grow. It's going to be they are only growing to the capacity of that current business needs, not for future capabilities. So that's kind of where I look at it across no matter the function, engineering, post sales, legal. It's what is this person fully capable of? Am I creating that environment? And then there is some translatable stuff across every single one of every business will have to have it of can you do a performance review? How do you have crucial conversations? How do you do the
Hmm.
core basics? But without understanding each individual, it's a cookie cutter like program that doesn't drive the right results at the right time. It's a checkbox in learning, which is not true learning. It's more of, information sharing, which is not something that we can have across, functions.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I like that approach. I like that point. So there's things that are same, but then there's also you have to create room for the individual part of that. It leads me to the natural question of, how do we scale those kinds of approaches? Because obviously that individual learning, you yourself, how do you split yourself across so many functions and people that are in there to kind of provide that individual um, uh, treatment that's
Yeah,
helpful.
it's a great question. So I actually go back. We're gonna go back in my history, way back when. My undergrad is in psychology, and I used to work at a youth treatment center, which is kind of where I got a lot of this desire for learning and development and training. Started really, really early on, working with these kids that some were behavioral, some were drug use, and it was something where it was the first time I saw a program that had to be tailored to the individual, but also had to be scalable. We had
Hmm.
to, funnel 60, 70 kids through every couple months into
Hmm.
this program. And what stuck out to me that I've carried with me into my business world was when I came into the organization, the way they trained me was they were focused on the frontline individual of
Hmm.
this is how you create this environment of here's the consistencies that have to happen for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the flexible areas. And the more I understood that, it gave me that ability to personalize something at scale, but not have to go an individual plan for every specific person of, okay, I'm not going to sit down. Okay, let's spend 18 hours with Sandra to figure out what's going on. It's okay, here's the consistency I need to get with Sandra. Whereas in my conversations, I uncover this flexible nature of, oh, this is what makes Sandra tick. Now I can kind of accommodate the flexible area. So
Yeah.
when I look at like our onboarding and our development and everything coming in, it's that same concept. If I'm going to bring a group of sales reps coming in, what are the core consistencies that have to happen no matter?
Mm.
However, does the team, the managers, the enablement individuals know where the flexibility lies of, okay, this rep's really, really good at prospecting, but not very good at opportunity management, whereas this one's opposite. And how can I bring that into an environment where they can build each other? So you take the work away from one individual and you create an environment that allows the strengths of different parts of the ecosystem to develop and train the individual on that personalized basis. That's where I see a lot of people fail in a lot of this development is I feel like as the manager, I have to do everything. And I have to make sure that's going to drive. I see enablement individuals do the same thing of,
Mhm.
okay, well, I have to make sure they're checking every box and I'm the one specializing in this. But the reality is take a look at those strengths and weaknesses, understand the desired outcome, and then balance each other to create the desired outcome without you carrying that full load. So that's how you take personalization, put it into scale, is by understanding the whole part of what you're trying to accomplish and where that flexibility can layer in, and then where your strengths are. So I, as an individual, have to know my strengths because if I know I'm having a weakness of one thing I tell people is I'm horrible at documentation. If I'm training on documentation, I'm not the right person. However, if I know this, I can bring somebody in with that strength to help build up that team and I don't carry that pressure, which makes it more flexible for us to get the skills that we need within the organization.
That's a great share. I love that focus on what can be systemized and then where's the flex for the individuals there. That's a really great way to lead some of the thinking around these systems. I love that. So I know you've built a team and you mentioned that already. You're building teams in a growing organization and you've done that before in your career as well. What are some of your, or one or more, let's say, I don't want to constrain you, biggest, aha moments about what actually drives high performance versus what we might think drives it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, to that question, before I became COO, my time was in tech companies doing revenue operations, came in, first revenue operations, built
Hmm.
teams, moved and did it again. And the first time I did it, it was something that, you know, there's a lot of pressure of hiring certain tactical skills of like, we need this skill, we need that skill. And it didn't feel right. And it was something that I learned very early on was if I want a high performing organization, I need to not focus on core tactical skills. Now, there are spaces in this world where I definitely need someone that does have certain experience. But what I found out for the majority of roles is I look for a certain persona that I cannot teach
Mm.
easily. I don't mean that of like someone who can't learn, but I mean I want to find someone who has a learner ability and a learner mindset
Hmm.
because I can teach tactical skills any day. I
Mm.
could bring someone in and show them how to do that. What I can't teach is someone to change their internal mindset of being curious and wanting to learn and wanting to grow and wanting to find, solutions no matter the role, whether it's sales, marketing, engineering, legal. Someone with that creative mindset can't be taught. So when I go through that interview process and people ask me all the time, like, okay, what are you looking for? My interviews sound very differently when I'm talking to someone. I want to hear more about, hey, how do you address these things? How do you think about these things? Not
Hmm.
walk me through how you've tactically,
Done this
done this
before.
before. So high performing organizations are created by individuals with curiosity, with the ability to go find information, curate information together to be able to come up with a better solution, not just repeat something that they've done before. So that's what I look for is that learner mindset that I cannot teach. It's something that needs to be inherent in that individual.
That's cool. I love that. It's I love that approach for hire getting the people. And I mean, and I would just add to, thinking the world today is just changing so much, right? Technology is changing, demands are changing. For getting a person like with this type of approach is critical to keeping up with the change, right? Not just done that before, almost it's like obsolete almost by the time you've done it, right? It's almost, that's exaggeration, but kind of a good way to think about the skill set for the workforce
Yeah.
today. All right. Do
Well,
you balance
even
yeah.
individuals, and sorry, sorry,
No,
real
no,
quick.
no, no, okay. No, please.
Like the other topics I talk about all the time is like this change in AI and engineering and like just the world
Yeah.
changing. if you take that learner mindset, I was talking to an individual the other day that this was a prime example of this. Was he was a frontline manager, had recently been put into the role. The company didn't have a defined development process for him. He was just thrown in. And I was just kind of asking his experience of what's going on, just doing a little mentorship. And what fascinated me is he turned to AI and was like, well, hey, I'm curious. And he started this dialogue with AI of like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm trying to go through. And
Mm-hmm.
it was coaching him through stuff that normally would be in a typical development plan. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like that mindset was somebody's like, hey, I know I have a gap and I need to go find solutions versus waiting for somebody else to train me. Like that even as an individual, even you and I can take that same thing of, do we wait for somebody else to be educating us and developing us, or are we taking out this new untapped potential of all the information out there and creating our own environment to develop and grow? And like that's where that persona I talk about, everyone that I've worked with is doing that similar thing where they are finding ways to develop themselves, not waiting for the company to develop them, which will help them grow 3, 4, 5 times quicker than
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah, so I hear you highlighting this as a really critical skill set for individuals going forward. And I think it comes actually with your psychology background. It's interesting that you highlight that this can't be something that's taught. So this is something inherent and or up to the individual to develop on their own. But then the skills themselves can, and the environment for developing those skills can be created in the organizations. And I would add
Mhm.
that balance with the systemized versus individual view that starts to paint a really nice picture of what it takes to build high performing teams.
Yep,
Awesome.
exactly.
I know you mentioned your role as a revenue operator, and I know that's obviously very data driven role inherently. So I'm just wondering, how does that data driven approach translate to your leadership decision making? How do you balance that with kind of the gut instinct on moving with some of these other pieces that are harder to measure?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, going to pause here for a second because
Yeah,
there's a
for
lot
sure.
to unpack there. It's a great question because there's many people in any form of operating role that get too sucked into the data. And then there's also the partners that we work with on the other side that get too sucked into the gut reaction of what's
Fair.
going on. So that's why I'm sitting here like kind of pausing and laughing because it's
Yeah.
this complete battle that we have. What we will always see is I can go find the data, make the data say anything I want on paper. Oh, if I'm looking at an individual, and I'll use sales again, just because a lot of people that hear this are like, okay, it's an easy one to quantify. If I have a sales rep that's doing really well, and we're like, oh, they're hitting their quota, therefore they should be a leader. How many times we said like, oh, the numbers say they should be the leader because they're the
Right.
one hitting that
Yeah.
mark. What that data will not show is what's that psychological behavior of that individual, what's the cultural fit of that individual. The data won't show that kind of granularity of different aspects of what's going on. Now, what it can show is, can this person follow a process? Is this person consistent? Does this
Mm.
person really understand what we're trying to accomplish? Like that's what data can start to construct. So
Hmm.
I could easily, once again, just throw numbers at a sheet and say, hey, based off this person should be promoted, this one should be demoted or let go, and like let's just call it good.
Hmm.
That will always almost always fail. But it's kind of the default that most people in operations have because that's their strength.
Hmm.
Now, being able to understand an individual at a deeper level beyond those metrics is where you start to find those, you know, needles in the haystack, those individuals that, okay, what's their end desire? And when I'm sitting down and I have this sheet of data, I will take time to go meet with these individuals and say, okay, well, what are your future desires? What are your objectives? What makes you tick? What makes you excited to come to work every day? And you start to uncover like this bread and butter of like, okay, well, awesome. This person's doing really well in their numbers and they have this satisfaction in being able to lead and guide and educate.
Yeah.
That's someone we need to move to a leader perspective. Now you have different roles like legal. It's going to be a bit more harder of like, oh, what are those metrics that we track? Now you can still say, okay, what's their understanding of the business and the business kind of results that they're driving. And you can use those metrics to say, hey, they're delivering on time. They understand the impact. Here's the financial impact, whatever it may be. And you can have that same conversation of can they progress within the organization? But it always comes with understanding that individual. It's easy as an executive to sit in a room and be like, oh, here's what the
I
numbers
like that.
show.
Yeah.
But we have to walk away and say, okay, do we truly know this person before we make a decision? Because it could be hurting us as a business and hurting that individual in their progression and where they want to go by forcing them. Now, I'm grateful. I was forced into operations. I was one of those where I got a call over the weekend, like, hey, Monday you're in operations.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, no, like, well, if you want a job, Monday you're in operations. I'm like, great, that's exactly what I want to do. and it worked out for me. But that's not the majority of the people. Is when you're forcing them into something that's not their desire kind of motivator, they will fail, even if the data said they would do very, very well.
Yeah. I like that. That's a, there's room for, I like how you highlighted that you can make data look at whatever you actually want on paper. That's a really good thing to keep coming back to in the day of just thinking about metrics and measurements all the time. And then, there's always the room to round it out with what, people to people approach as well. Just, I always come back to, I used to play sports, like, and in sports like that, you can't look at just the scoring or the numbers. There's often that linchpin in the team that's actually holding the culture, the team together, providing the support to enable the numbers. And you would always miss that without talking to people. And the same, I think, would be true with high performing teams in the workplace.
Yeah, I also used to play sports.
Yeah,
Used to. I'm getting too old these days. But it
I
was a
feel
very
the
similar
same.
thing of like, I played many different ones, but depending on where I was on the field, I'd have to know what somebody across the field is going to be doing or expecting so I could be in the right place. But it came to that communication, but it
Yeah.
also came through working together and like understanding really how that person thinks. So I could start to think similar to that person when we would interact, which is also a part of like, when we talk about development of individuals, do we know how they're going to react to a situation? And have we given them the environment to try so we can see, oh, hey, when we put pressure on them here, this is how they reacted. Now I know going forward, if I give this more clarity, they can handle it in a much better way. So it's also a lot of trial and error with individuals of
Hmm.
letting them know failure is okay. And we're going to put you in situations where you might fail, but it's going to be learning for you and for us to figure
Yeah.
out the ideal structure of how do we communicate with each other that you can, once again, provide your best self
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. The I saw just to switch gears a little bit. You work with very major clients. I know, like Google, IBMs of the world, that inherently comes with very high demands and high expectations just by nature of it, the work itself. It's like, how do you protect your team from the pressure of delivery with, also the balance and recovery and, ultimately not burning out, but kind of honing more of that sustainable performance is how we like to think about it. I just
Yeah.
wonder your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'll probably go a different direction than originally planned.
Okay.
Part of this comes from perception. I could walk into a room, and before we talk about like these big customers, I could walk into a room in my early career and be in a room with a CEO or COO and be very intimidated and be like, "What am I doing here?" The more I've kind of grown up in my career, you realize these are just normal people trying to figure stuff out, just like you.
People helping people, yeah.
You put your own perspective on like the intimidation factor of these
Mhm.
individuals. And as I've seen that also with customers where you're going in, it's like, okay, well, Google's very intimidating. They do all this stuff, but they're just a company trying
Yeah,
to figure it out just like us. And we being a services company, they're hiring us to do something that they're not able to do themselves.
yeah.
And so when you put that into perspective of like, oh, well, we're actually the experts and oh, we're
Mhm.
actually the one that do this day in, day out. And they want our kind of support in what they're trying to do reduces that intimidation of what that is. Now, we always need to have high expectations of delivery. We need to have high expectations of making them a happy customer. That will not go away, but by eliminating some of the stress of like, oh, as soon as Google pops up, we're like, oh, Google. It's like, no, cool. Like we're working with Google. Here's the programs we're working with. We know the customers. We know the individuals specifically that we work with on, our sales organization. We like them to know them on a very personal level. So when we get on a call with someone whose name is Michelle, we're like, oh, it's Michelle. Like it's not intimidation. Now, burnout is something that you know, growing up in high tech, it was, these companies we work with. I grew up in the early stage high tech companies. I wanted to be
Mm.
them. And so you were grinding day in, day out, and burnout was just a common part of the culture. Now, you never called it burnout. It was more
Yeah,
of,
fair.
we're giving it a little extra percentage. And it's
Yeah.
like, we're burning ourselves out. That still exists. And as we see the markets of how they are today, that will always exist, that there's higher and more pressure being put on people.
Mhm.
And there's not a ton of resources. And so it's how do we think through this of, what is true? So one of the things that I have with the team is true prioritization.
Mm.
Can we sit down and do you as an individual know how to prioritize? Or are you waiting on somebody else to tell you, your priorities? Because if you're waiting on that, you will burn out very quickly because you can't voice your concern on your bandwidth. Now, if I can do that give and take of, hey, I can focus on this today, that tomorrow, no consequences. That's where they are stay balanced. The other part that we look at with delivery of high expectations is being very, very communicative in what we can do and what we are doing. That's the biggest piece of I might come to an IBM and say, "Hey, we're gonna be a couple weeks late. Here's why." And they'll be like, "Cool, yeah, makes sense." Or I don't communicate at all. We hit that deadline. They're like, "What's going on?" And then it's a little bit later we finally deliver something for them. That's where anyone working with these high value customers, communication is absolutely
Yeah.
key.
Internally, yeah, internally and internally
Yep.
and then externally to clients as
Yep.
well. I love that. So I
Exactly.
feel like you highlighted kind of the 3 big pillars actually that how I think about also as that performance and burnout. A mindset training is what I would say, kind of so managing that perception. We're just people helping people. We know what we're doing. They need our help. And that's let's just bring down the noise in our own heads in the room as well, right? True prioritization and how actually somebody is handling that as a skill and a habit and then communication kind of really being openly like this is what we need to get this done and then aligning client expectations with that as well. So that's a really helpful. I just want to kind of point out those echo those because I think those are such important takeaways on this subject. There's no silver bullet solution, but these as a habit are is kind of how to tackle that balance. Awesome. How do you set your teams? Like, so building the teams again, when you're building them from scratch and and you know this coming into it, you know it's going to take this systemized kind of approach with personalization and all these pillars that are kind of general but so important. How do you start with somebody from day one, kind of talking about that and setting expectations on that? Again, what I call sustainable performance.
Yeah. And part of this answer does depend on the level of individual coming into the organization, right? So if
Mhm,
this is
right.
someone that should have a couple years of experience that I'm bringing in to do something very specific. It's setting an expectation from day one of like, my relationship with you is let me tell you what we're trying to accomplish and then giving you the resources to do that. Now I need you
Hmm.
to communicate with me what you're
Yeah.
lacking and then make sure you have all that information that you might need. And so they become very autonomous of here's that problem, here's what you're hired to do, here's everything at your disposal and educating them and then helping create that environment that they can
Hmm.
go, try, do, and work very quickly.
Hmm.
So, like, for them, that's gonna be unique. Now, I'm not gonna do that for every role. Like, if I'm bringing an entry level role in, let's say a data analyst, and I'm gonna say, "Hey, oh, here's our problem, go." If they've never done it before, that's where it's the conversation becomes knowledge share. Do you
Hmm.
have that knowledge that you're going to need? It's expectation sharing of, and this is what we expect to see. And then it's feedback loops. Let's
Hmm.
give you something to try. Let's give you something to do. Let's figure out, can you do it? If not, we're not going to move on until we get you to that point. And this is where I see a lot of go to market exercises happen. And even I'd say, anything that's customer facing, I would say the same thing happens when you bring them on board is most companies will have their onboarding process and they'll dump people into this very, very quickly. And what you miss is somebody may not be picking up on one piece very
Hmm.
well. But companies just move like right past it, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. Like, we got to check our box. We're going to be on time, and we got to ramp this person a certain aspect." But by taking a minute to say, okay, do you actually comprehend the expectations
Hmm.
and the process of how we do this? And if I spend a little bit in one area, I might go quicker down the road. And so that's where I look at it from like an entry level person is, do they have that information sharing and do they grasp it? Do they have the expectations? Can they regurgitate the expectations back to me? And then are we giving them exercises to show that it's actually being retained? And if not, we need to revisit. We need to remodify.
Yeah.
So that's where it varies in the company. Someone that's done it before, I can kind of just throw it at them and say, "Hey, here's what's going on. Let's do some feedback loops as you go along." Others, it needs to be very structured that we're creating that
Yeah.
environment for.
I like the way a lot of times you're highlighting this because I like that knowledge share, expectation share, and the feedback loop. Oh, it draws also our attention to the fact that this is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time training, one-off sessions, one-off injection. It's really supporting an employee through their journey and the ebb and flow of the career and where they might also be in their life as well. So I like that kind of highlight for sure. But you brought this kind of it brings up a question for me about, the different treatments that different levels get. Of course, inherently there's just limited resources, right, for everybody. And I know just historically and from my own corporate experience, often more investment comes to some of those lead roles or more senior roles. And that makes sense in many ways, but we have to recognize that it can also be too late sometimes for people, especially when we're talking about developing some of those habits and skill sets that are critical and should are best done earlier in their careers. But of course, that limited resource pool kind of creates this constraint on that. So I just wonder what your approach is with kind of balancing that kind of, typical investment in senior levels with, the really needed support that early entry and mid-career leaders, mid-level can really benefit from.
It's a great question because I also look at like my past and the way I was brought into like the corporate America. I don't wish anybody else to have to go through. It was a lot of trying to figure things out on my own, no support from the company, not knowing expectations. That's where a lot of my background comes is like, okay, let's learn from everything bad that happened to me and like make sure it doesn't happen for someone
Mm,
else. But what I still see in conversation is companies are not always investing in their senior leaders. Now, we talk about like, oh, they are, but most senior leaders are still having, unless it's a large organization. So, like, unless it's
mhm,
like our Googles and stuff like that,
yeah,
absolutely they have programs. But most of the people that are going to be listening to, something like this, they don't have that. They're not getting thousands of dollars to grow and invest, and so it's up to them as individuals to say, okay, how can I go get information? You see this growth of all these networks that have grown over the last 10 years because people are realizing, oh, my company's not going to give me everything I have. I need to go outside of it to figure out what's going on.
mhm,
I used to work for a tech company that were selling a learning technology. And part of the concept was the company's not going to be able to teach you everything you need. What if we curate information externally to bring it to a place where you can grow as an individual and you can start to consume that you want?
mm,
Because that's how large companies were operating was they had their core tracks of you could go select, do you want this track, this track, this track. But a lot of cases they're like, this doesn't really relate to me. How can I
right,
go find something that does? So we over the last many years, we've had a shift to an external perspective.
mm,
Now, what's happening is it goes back to those individuals is you're still going to have at any level individual like I'm going to go figure this out for myself. What I see though is senior leaders are able to understand and prioritize a bit better. So like, oh, I'll save some time throughout my week, to make sure I'm doing this. What I don't see is newer people entering leadership roles. They don't feel comfortable being like, hey, I'm going to set aside a half an hour a week, half an hour a day, whatever it is to develop myself because they don't understand that development can add positive results to their team and to their company. So what's happening is we see too many of them getting overwhelmed by this new responsibility. The
mhm,
company is giving them training that may not be fully relatable or in real time. And so they are just having to kind of figure it out as they go with some good things and bad things. But most of the time, they're not getting that feedback loop of like, hey, let's sit down. What happened in that situation? Because it's happening behind the scenes.
mm,
So when I look at that environment of like, okay, well, how do you fix that? The end result goes back to if you're not creating something flexible, it's going to be you have to find the people that fit that model you have.
mhm,
And that's kind of a tough conversation because if I've brought somebody in as a leader, and I'm like, oh, they're not adapting, can I either give them the environment to adapt, or do I need to help encourage them to go somewhere where their learning model will align, and I need to find someone that will fit with our learning model that can develop and grow. And that's kind of the part of the conversation I think most leaders fail on is I'm so focused on building someone in my company. And I think that's the only end result. But
mm,
to truly build someone in their future career, there's many times that there's an environment or culture much better for them to grow. And I need to accept that I can't be the perfect environment for everyone. So ideally, yes, I can train everyone from day one. Being in the companies I'm at, I get that there's going to be times where someone gets put into a role and we don't have time to sit down and really go because we're moving so quickly as a
yeah,
business. But it's that constant assessment of are they still getting the support and resources they need? If not, how do we readjust that? Either give them resources or find a better place for them to fit.
get yeah, that's a very healthy view to look at it and to recognize sometimes even as much as we want to be all things to our people, it's not actually the reality of it, right? So it's probably a healthy blend of internal and external support. I'd love to extend that a little bit and consider because it sounds like you have very mature leadership development approaches in the company. How do you blend the internal resources balance internal resources and your time spent on development with getting some input from experts or people who are dedicated in that space externally when you're looking for that ecosystem that can best support the workforce of today.
Yeah. This will not be a popular opinion, so
Great, I love
be
it.
prepared for it. I've sat through so many external trainings where we bring people in and it's like, oh, perfect time that we need this person to talk about it. But every time I walk away, I'm like, that was a good motivational speech, but it didn't fully relate to the exact situation that we're dealing with.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it'd be left to us oftentimes to take that to internalize it, to then turn it into reality, which is great. There's an environment for that. There's people for that. For me, that's not for me, because I walked away being like, well, now I have more work to go take this, interpret it, and like put it in. Versus like if I create the environment myself and like really drove it from that expectation, it was less work on my end, and I have more control of. I know exactly what's going to be said of like, hey, if they say this weird thing over here, now I got to come back to the team and be like, hey, yeah, they said that, but that's not relatable to us. So I've actually like in this most recent approach of I'm constantly trying new ways, right? And that's kind of one of my realities going back to that model is something I did 10 years ago is not going to be what I implement in my company now. So I had some leaders, and I will also admit, if you talk to a lot of the managers, we're like, yeah, I'm not getting the full training I need. And 100%, I get it. And I agree. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
doing it to the full level that I would love to, but I'm taking that concept of using the technology that exists today of I have a typical training. I say, hey, here's my typical training. AI, give me some resources, some case studies, some, videos to watch. And I can layer it in with what used to be my own training to say, hey, here's something I'm going to leave my one-on-one with.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where I still say is I'm nowhere near. I could have 20 topics I want to train somebody on. I'm not going to get through them anytime soon, but am I at least progressing each week on one of them and giving them a takeaway to start to develop it? And so it's that 1% concept of if I'm giving them a little bit, 1% every day, that compounding growth will help them become who they want to become.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
some people absolutely they'll bring in external people and it's people they trust and have heard from. It's gonna be great. Others I'd encourage to go find external resources that exist today everywhere that they could use that creates a multi-touch learning experience to be adaptive to the way people learn and develop in real time. And so if someone tells me, hey, I prefer YouTube videos, anytime I talk to them, I'm like, hey, here's a YouTube video. If someone likes articles, awesome. Every time I share something with you, it's gonna be an article, but it comes back to how flexible is it and how do I know them? And do I know where to go find resources that are trustworthy?
Yeah, that totally checks out. I like how you I think that is a lot of it's worth highlighting kind of that, great motivational speech versus actually helping in the reality that we live in today is actually probably a big contributor to some of the well, even the knowing doing gap, right? Like and inspiration is really I like to think, it's like flash in a pan, right? Like it's like, whoa,
Yep.
but the sustainability of performance is way more about finding those little improvements day by day and in the longevity of the solution itself. So that's a really important thing to highlight because I think with some of the need for to move away from some of the traditional approaches to what really works in the work in the workplace again of today. Awesome. I wonder, so it's clear that you're very strategic and you give this a lot of attention. But of course, in a COO role, you also have, I kind of think there's three buckets of things that kind of have come up in the discussion today. You, of course, will have a strategic focus on your own role and where the company is going. You have an operational delivery role with your teams and such diverse across diverse functions. And then, of course, you're spending so much time with people development and enabling them, which is a huge part of a leadership role. How do you think about balancing that and, driving your own prioritization scheme to really kind of, not split yourself, but kind of give each of those areas different attention? What does that really look like in reality for our audience? It would be great to kind of just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Something that's it's ever flowing.
Yeah.
Some weeks there's going to be, more need on the development side based off situations going on. Other weeks that, heads down on strategy. But when I come down to it though, when I come in, so oftentimes I'll come into an organization that's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And where I see the ability to create change comes down to the true culture of that organization. I know we talk about culture a lot, but it's like, well, what does it really mean? For me, it's that understanding of does someone feel once again feel like they enjoy coming to work?
Hmm.
Do they feel like they can give their best selves? And if that is a yes, I can then have the flexibility in my conversations that it's not a separation of these three
Yeah.
topics. It's one cohesive experience for me to say, hey, what are we really trying to do? And then how does that layer into everyone?
Hmm.
Now, the execution is definitely going to be different. If I create the strategy and it's like, okay, well, the execution is going to be a bit over here on the tactical, it's going to be a bit over here on the development. Here's our gaps. Here's what's going on. But it's when you don't have that environment for someone feeling that they can be their best self. So I worked at one point in a very micromanagement culture,
Mm.
and that is where it was very, very hard to get change. It was very hard to say, hey, here's where we want to go strategically. We want to do this new, type of partnership or development or whatever it is. It was hard to then make people adapt to that because they're like, hey, I don't have room to be able to do anything different. You're holding me accountable to every little thing I do every minute of the day.
Hmm.
coming into an environment where it's like, hey, we built it more on expectations of here's what we expect you to do, and then you have that autonomy to find out it's the end goal. We say, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and you have that flexibility to
Hmm.
kind of control some variables in that. It gives you the ability to say, oh, hey, if we have something new and they want to train me, I have that bandwidth, I have that
Hmm.
capability to then put it into practice. And it's that practical aspect that I think creates separations for executives like myself. Is if I can't have people being able to practice on their own, it makes that I have to very silo. Here's the strategy. Now here's the execution. Whereas if it's, hey, I'm giving people the idea of what we're trying to accomplish, and they're like, ooh, here's how I can tie that to my own time. I don't have to context switch very much between these things on
Yeah.
a daily basis. So that's how I look at it. I would say today, like once again, I'm still not perfect. I do spend, a third of my time. Well, I'd like to say a third of my time on strategy, but it's probably more of like currently a fourth of my time on strategy, and a bulk maybe half my time on the development and execution and like understanding of the kind of day-to-day expectation setting. So like it is currently there, but it'll shift. Next
Yeah.
quarter it's going to be different
Yeah.
based off
Of course. Yeah.
how we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. But yeah, it is something that I would encourage people to see if it's cohesive, and if it's not, you need to take a step back and say, okay, why are these people not satisfied? Why are they not developing? And it could be how you're structuring the roles and expectations, or your even company objectives. If you don't have company objectives, then of course people are going to have a hard time developing into what you want them to become, because all they know is I'm doing the 5 tasks you've taught me to
Yeah.
do, and that's all I'm going to be doing every
Yeah.
day.
I like that. So you're thinking about integrating all the different areas and again enabling the workforce, which then probably you can only do that coming back to the very beginning where we started is getting people who are learning and curiosity minded and giving them kind of room to explore within the parameters of the company and the objectives. How do you feel like just extending on that? And I love that sometimes you have a more controversial opinion. That's exactly what we're looking for, a different way of kind of thinking. How do you feel like how people should be considering their, work and then life kind of integration? We have that integration across different priorities at work, but then does that extend into their life as well in order to drive high performance, in your opinion?
When I hear about like people putting in long hours, so part of my career is I went from psychology to finance, and I worked in the investment world, and it was expected you work 70 hours a week, 70 hours a week, and it was just that's life. It's kind of expected. Coming into tech, you had a blend. You had people that are like, oh, it's more flexible, and then you had people that were, I still got to put in so many hours. What was interesting to watch, and if we keep like that learner concept, was I got lucky in one of my tech companies being a learning company. They're like, hey, we want you to dedicate time every single day to learning.
Mm,
And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. But it put a new perspective as I went from company to company. The people that could understand that learning could be a part of their actual day work that they're being paid for, and those that didn't, they're like, oh, my learning can only happen outside of work hours, and it can only be development, and it has to be, work related. I would oftentimes, at this company, the prior, would say, "Hey, learn anything. Doesn't have to be work related. Learn anything,
mm,
because as long as you keep that
yeah,
capability to keep
right.
going, like that's valuable." But people get stuck in all my learning has to be work focused, something that's relatable to me, and it pigeonholes them into their ability to produce. So when I look at that balance, I'm actually a very huge advocate for work life balance. I have 6 kids, so it's like I
Oh,
don't have a choice of you got to balance work and
congratulations.
life.
Wow, yes.
So
You would be an expert in my books on the subject then.
yeah, it's I have no choice. My balance is I have to walk away, and I have to deal with my second job, and my
Yeah,
kids are gonna hate that I call it my second job. But
yeah,
with
yeah,
dance and sports, it's
yeah.
chauffeur and
I get that.
cater
Yeah,
and all sorts of stuff. But I've noticed people that can create that balance of, for me, it's, am I developing myself from my career perspective? Am I developing myself from my personal perspective? Am I developing myself from a spiritual perspective? And if I'm not checking all those boxes,
yeah,
I'm imbalanced, and
yeah,
I'm going to be an odd shaped, tripod that I need to keep all of them strong. And so that's where I see people of what are their foundation now. And not everyone's going to have the same 3 pillars that I do, but
yeah,
it's, do they have their pillars of how they are as an individual? And if they don't feed those pillars, they will become imbalanced, and we go back to burnout. That's what drives
yeah,
burnout, is there's an imbalance in one part of what feeds them and fuels them. So that's where it's so important, but it's also hard to control, because how am I going to be like, hey, go practice surfing, go do whatever you do? Like there's only
yeah.
so much I can do. It's still to that person and
Of
their
course, yeah,
capabilities and bandwidth to make sure they're balancing it, but I can also make sure I'm addressing and trying to figure out what that is for them to encourage that when I notice them being off.
yeah. Yeah, that's a really great view to share. And yes, I would say from an expert on the two sides of the job. But yeah, ultimately we can't be at our best at work if, the house is on fire, right? And we're ignoring that. It's going to cut into that performance bandwidth that we have as individuals. Like we can't be splitting ourselves like that. And that's a kind of a new, a new approach that we're bringing into the workplace proudly, because I think it's much needed to help people succeed, truly succeed in this day and age. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Um, what keeps you up at night? Here to kind of wind down a couple of questions at the end. It's like, what keeps you up at night about your leadership pipeline and development that, if you had a magic wand, you would just love to, fix and address?
Yeah. It kind of goes back to we're a very fast-paced company.
Mhm,
And I want to say this is just relatable to us, but operational efficiency is so huge right now that we do have a lot of people taking on a lot of responsibility with high expectations. And people are doing a great job. If I could today just snap my fingers, I would love to reduce the workload on individuals to give them more comfort in
mhm,
their own development. Now, once again, that does not mean that I have a perfect training plan for everyone, but like creating that space where people can breathe and try new
mhm,
things and develop and grow. That's something that we've kind of gone away from over the last couple of years of as we see high expectations, as markets change, as inflation and everything else, constant pressure being put on businesses. And that's where I see myself specifically losing value is it's gone too quickly in giving more work to people and hoping that they learn from that experience, but not giving them the space
space to do that. Yeah.
to do it. So that'd be for my company today. That would be my snap my fingers. Boom. They all have that little bit of extra time to give us more time to do those feedback loops. I'd say like, but what I would want more from like the entire world, if I could snap our fingers and say, what problem are we solving? It's taking those resources that exist and sharing them in a much more efficient way.
Hmm.
There's also things that are being populated like somebody might have an opinion that's not valid and that's what's getting shared. Like how can we find a way to take our current situation and have information surface that's truly relatable, that's valid, right? And that's something that doesn't fully exist. Like it's kind of existing. I'm seeing people do it with AI, or seeing it do with that, but like that's what I would love is people can say, hey, here's my situation, and have something truly curated that's accurate, that's going to be productive, that I'm spending my time on things that matter. I think you're going to see more of it in the next couple of months. But I would just love to see that today. Like, boom, I want everyone to have that access today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds great. And it comes back also to a principle that you share, or important mind set that you shared about, you've gone through a grind to get where you are today. I have my own version of that. Many of us really in this, Gen X generation probably, and I infer here, like just my own, have gone through a version of that. But it's really important to think about how can we help the leaders of the next generations not go through the same? Like, how can we actually help them? And that's what you're saying. Like, what are the things that work best? How do we aggregate them? How do we make them applicable and make them available to people today? Not make them go through the same hardships unnecessarily. It's so wasteful, right? At the individual and organizational level. That's a really important mindset sometimes that we don't always see with some of the leadership out there. Yeah, awesome. All right, this was such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Is there anything you would like to add at towards the end?
No, I would just say like my encouragement for everyone is just kind of reflect on once again, what's your personal development, even as a leader, and we're talking like how do we develop others in the pipeline. What is your personal development? If you can't answer like, hey, this is what I've done
Mhm.
this last week to develop myself, you're never going to be able to instill that culture for people behind you. And you're never going to be able to build that pipeline. So if it becomes natural for you, people will naturally gravitate to you in the sense of I have people that I would love to work with again because that's the environment we created is
Yeah,
they know I'm constantly trying to learn as well. And so they felt that they could do that in kind of that environment. So it starts with you. So just always remember if you have a problem in your company, look at yourself first. Am I doing this? Am I exampling this? If the answer is no, you know where to start. If the answer is I am, great. Now move on to the next phase. But we too often focus on those pipeline than we do ourselves.
yeah. Yes, that's a great advice to end on. And I want to highlight that too when the other point you brought up, and that development can come from any aspect of life, and it's still feeding that growth mindset and the learning mindset. Again, kind of tying the couple of topics together. If I learn, let's say, what my fitness looked like as a varsity athlete in my early 20s, I have to learn what, again, for me, it's, speaking personally, I had to relearn what that looks like in my But that learning is feeding that mindset that helps, and I'm becoming that individual who can perform at the company, and that helps as well, not just me feeling good about myself. So all these things are so interesting how they're so integrated and related. But yeah, and I really liked where the conversation went today. Thank you so much, Branden, for sharing your thoughts with us today and the audience.
My pleasure.
All right.